Hello, class, and welcome to Lesson 6 lectures on editing. This is Lecture 1. And in our first slide here, we have a still from The Invisible Man, directed by Australian Leigh Whannell. And I've chosen this film for this lesson because it has exceptional editing. So what is editing? Well, editing, at its most basic definition, is the coordination of one shot with the next. And we can define a shot as one uninterrupted film image. It can be a split second in duration, or it could be 10 minutes in duration. As long as it's uninterrupted by a cut, that's what we consider a shot. Editing is the putting together of shots. We talked about how each formal element that we've studied in this class builds on the next. So we start with a narrative, right? Somebody gets an idea for a movie, they write it into a screenplay. Then the filmmakers take the screenplay and create the stage, right? The production design, the mise en scène, the actors, the costumes, the sets, the lighting, and the cameras come in. They shoot all of that, they shoot the action on the stage, and then finally we get to the editing, in which those shots are put together, recombined to create a narrative. Early films from the 1890s, which was the birth of cinema, were typically just one shot. Later, as we saw, for example, in A Trip to the Moon, they moved on to a couple of shots, but early cinema was still taking its influences from the stage and from still photography. Editing as a language evolved over the first few decades of cinema. And since the 20s, when film theorists and directors began to realize what editing could achieve, it has been the most widely discussed film technique. Some people have found in editing the key to cinema. And what does that mean? Why is editing the key to cinema as opposed to some of these other elements? Well, some people believe that editing is the only element of cinema that's unique to cinema. So we know that narratives have been around for thousands of years. People have been writing novels and plays, epic poems, right? Photography's been around since the middle of the 19th century. The stage has been around for thousands of years. Drama, acting has been around for thousands of years. Dance, music, all of this stuff already exists as its own art form. It's just being combined to make cinema. But editing is the one thing that's true to cinema and does not exist in these other arts. It also is what's responsible in some ways for cinema moving, right? Along with cinematography, it helps us create the motion in motion picture. Some films famous for their editing include Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith. We talked about him a little bit already. Innovative director who pioneered some of the most standard shots and cuts that we use today. Close-ups, medium shots, shot reverse shot, cutting on action, all the stuff that standard film language was being innovated already by the middle of the second decade of the 20th century, so early in the evolution of cinema. Psycho and Alfred Hitchcock's films in general are known for their editing because Hitchcock was a master at creating suspense, and he used editing as one of his major tools to create suspense in his audience. Apocalypse Now, Coppola's famous film, Raging Bull, Martin Scorsese's famous film. Also Goodfellas is another one famous for its editing. The Silence of the Lambs, and The Hurt Locker. So, of course, there are many other films that are known for their editing, but these are just some of the ones on film history that stand out. The cut. The most common means of joining two shots together is simply called the cut. Probably heard this before, right? And it's called that because until the rise of digital editing in the 90s, a cut was made by splicing two shots together by means of cement or tape. They were literally cut, right? The film was taken from the camera and cut and taped back together. Some filmmakers try to anticipate how they want to put shots together during filming. They have an idea of how they want everything to flow, and so they shoot in that order. They shoot shots of a certain duration, and they try to get a rough cut of the film before it even goes to editing. But that's hard to do. So editing after shooting is the norm, and even filmmakers that try to put their shots together during filming end up editing afterwards because it's impossible to get all the time in and everything just right. So as viewers, we perceive a shot as an uninterrupted segment of screen time, space, or graphic configurations, right? I said that a shot can be a second long or it can be 10 minutes long. But cuts are perceived as instantaneous, right? A shot changes instantaneously from one shot to another, and we're just meant to concentrate on the shots, right? The edits are really supposed to be invisible. Other kinds of edits are more visible. Fades, dissolves, and wipes, right? These are the kinds of edits in which shots replace each other gradually. And the point here is to create different kinds of transitions. So a fade out gradually darkens the end of a shot to black, right? It gives us a minute as a viewer to kind of catch our breath before the next sequence, or maybe it's the end of the movie, right? Fade in, same thing. A little bit longer transition from shot to shot. A dissolve briefly superimposes the end of shot A and the beginning of shot B. We've all seen this. All of these can be done with your cameras for the most part, right? We see them all over YouTube. These are pretty easy effects to create. And then a wipe. Shot B replaces shot A with a line moving across the scene, which wipes away the previous shot. So you will watch this video linked to the course on types of transitions in editing so that you can get a visual idea of these basic shots. So as soon as this lecture is over, please go and watch this video. It's only a few minutes long. Here's an example of a wipe in Star Wars. A wipe is kind of an old-fashioned transition. It's not used much, but Lucas was making the Star Wars movies as a homage to films from the 1930s. And so he used them in Star Wars. And even throughout the Star Wars trilogies, the later ones, they became part of the visual language of Star Wars. And you can see here how on the left side of the screen you have a shot that's wiping over the previous shot in the right side, right? Or here in the bottom, one that's wiping down. Okay, editing within the formal system. The formal system being the system of filmmaking that we've been talking about, all these different elements and how they're pieced together. So an ordinary Hollywood film of 90 minutes to 2.5 hours typically contains between 1,000 and 2,000 shots. An action movie might have 3,000 or more because the shot duration is so much shorter, because the editor and director are using short shots to create a sense of pace, right? A fast-paced effect. So this fact alone, the fact that the thousands of shots thousands of cuts per film suggests that editing strongly shapes viewers' experiences even if we aren't aware of it. Editing contributes a great deal to a film's organization and its effect on spectators. And as we talked about, some people would say that editing has the most effect on the way that a film comes together and the way that an audience perceives it. Although many films today are shot with several cameras running simultaneously in order to be able to capture different angles, right? Or if you have a special effects scene where you're doing pyrotechnics or something and something's going to blow up, and you're only going to be able to get it once, you want to make sure you've got 5 or 6 cameras pointing at it so you capture the film that you need. But throughout film history, most sequences have been shot with just one camera. And a film editor must assemble a large and varied batch of footage, either from the one camera or from the multiple cameras. There is a ton of film. This is why films take so long to make. You might hear that, oh, this film finished principal photography in February of 2019, but it's not scheduled to come out until June of 2020. Why is that? Well, partially it's because it has to be edited. Of course, special effects have to be added. Those are time-consuming. Sound, and other post-production. But as we talked about, this is why filmmakers plan for the editing phase, right? During the prep and shooting, with an idea of how shots are eventually going to fit together. And one method that you've probably seen is the storyboard, when shots are sketched out ahead of time in relation to one another so that everybody has an idea of how it's supposed to look. Doesn't mean things won't change during filming, depending on different factors. But just, making things easier and quicker and less expensive by not having to just kind of randomly shoot and going in blind. That's not an advisable method. Unless, of course, you're experimenting, right? You're experimenting with your camera, with your phone, you're trying to learn or whatever. And then the editing table is now computerized using software is where the edits happen. And here is an example of a common editing program that's used in the industry, Adobe Premiere Pro. And you can see the way that it's laid out. You have a variety of shots on the left. You have the shot that's being worked on at the top, and then the cuts at the bottom, the length of shots, where they could be trimmed, moved around, and so on. So you can get an idea of how much easier it would be to use a computer than it would be to use scissors and tape, because obviously it's just like using a word processor is easier than using a typewriter when it comes to editing. So this is why, for the most part, even old school filmmakers have come over to the idea of editing on a computer. Okay, so that is the end of part 1. Go on and watch part 2. And of course, if you haven't watched The Invisible Man yet, go ahead and watch that as well.